You probably wouldn't think twice about walking through a forest if someone told you wolves lived there. But if you actually saw one, everything inside you would change. Your heart would race. Your breathing would shorten. But the real answer is far stranger than simple fear, because the animal standing in front of you is almost certainly far more afraid of you than you are of it. And that single fact completely changes the story you've been told about wolves. For centuries, wolves have carried one of the darkest reputations in human history. Your childhood stories warned you about them. Movies turned them into relentless hunters. Legends painted them as monsters waiting just beyond the edge of the trees. But how much of that reputation is actually deserved? If wolves are such dangerous predators, why do millions of people live near them every single year without ever being attacked? The answer isn't that wolves are harmless, it is that their relationship with humans is far more complicated than most people imagine. A wolf is perfectly capable of killing a person. It has the strength, it has the teeth, it has the instincts, yet healthy wild wolves almost always choose not to. That decision has puzzled biologists for decades, because from a purely physical perspective, humans shouldn't seem especially intimidating. You don't have claws, you don't have fangs. You can't outrun a wolf through deep snow or dense forest. On paper, you look surprisingly vulnerable, so why does the wolf usually walk away? Part of the answer lies deep in evolution. A wolf survives by making good decisions. Every hunt carries risk. Even a deer can break a wolf's leg with one well-placed kick. An elk can crush its ribs. A moose can kill an entire pack. For a predator, injury is often a death sentence. Unlike humans, wild animals don't recover in hospitals. A broken bone can mean starvation. So wolves learn to calculate risk with incredible precision. They don't simply ask whether they can win, they ask whether winning is worth the cost. And humans have always looked unpredictable. You stand upright, you make loud noises, you build fires, you travel in groups. For thousands of years, your ancestors also hunted wolves, trapped them, poisoned them, and chased them across entire continents. Generation after generation, wolves that stayed away from people survived long enough to pass on that cautious behavior, while bolder wolves often disappeared before reproducing. Fear in this case became an evolutionary advantage. That instinct still shapes wolf behavior today. Which is why most people who spend years studying wolves never experience aggression at all. The numbers are almost unbelievable. One of the most revealing investigations came from wolf biologist Mark McNay, who spent years digging through historical records across North America. Instead of relying on rumors or sensational newspaper stories, he searched for documented cases that could actually be verified. The results surprised almost everyone. Between 1900 and 1969, covering nearly 70 years, he found only one confirmed case of an unprovoked wolf attack. Just one. Then something changed. Over roughly the next 2 decades, documented incidents rose to 18. At first glance, that sounds alarming. Did wolves suddenly become more aggressive? Not really. The animals hadn't changed nearly as much as people had. By the late 20th century, wolves were recovering in many regions after decades of persecution. Human recreation in wilderness areas also exploded. More hikers entered wolf habitat. More campsites appeared. More roads reached remote forests. More people began photographing wildlife at close range instead of avoiding it. In simple terms, wolves and humans started crossing paths far more often. More encounters naturally meant more opportunities for the rare incident. That doesn't mean wolves lost their fear, it means circumstances changed, and circumstances matter. Because when scientists examine almost every serious wolf attack, they rarely find a random act of violence. They usually find a chain of events. Sometimes that chain begins with disease. Long before modern medicine controlled rabies, Europe's most terrifying wolf stories often involved what people called mad wolves. These weren't healthy predators. They were infected animals suffering from a virus that attacks the brain. Rabies destroys normal behavior. Instead of avoiding people, infected wolves wandered directly into villages. Instead of attacking once and fleeing, they sometimes bit dozens of people in a single frenzy. Historical records from 18th and 19th century Russia and France describe these horrifying outbreaks, where a single rabid wolf could leave an entire community injured within minutes. Those stories spread quickly. So did the fear. For generations, they shaped the public image of wolves. But there was one detail people rarely remembered afterward. The wolf wasn't behaving like a wolf anymore. It was behaving like an animal whose brain had been hijacked by disease. That distinction changed everything. As rabies vaccination programs expanded across Europe and North America, rabid wolves became extraordinarily rare. Quietly, almost without public attention, one of the biggest historical causes of wolf attacks nearly disappeared. The old stories remained. The reason behind them largely vanished. Yet the reputation stayed exactly the same. How often do reputations survive long after the evidence that created them has disappeared? Even today, many people instinctively rank wolves among the deadliest animals they could encounter. The comparison with another familiar animal is almost shocking. Over the last 25 years, dogs have killed more than 300 people in North America. Wolves? One or two. The contrast isn't even close. Yet very few people lie awake worrying about the neighbor's dog while imagining the wolf hundreds of miles away as the greater threat. Your brain doesn't naturally measure danger by statistics. It measures danger through stories. And wolves have inherited some of the most powerful stories ever told. That doesn't mean every reassuring statistic tells the entire truth, because scientists who study wolf attacks have learned something equally important. When wolves do attack, the question is almost never whether they are capable. The real question is what changed. Sometimes the answer is disease. Sometimes the answer is people. And sometimes the answer is something so ordinary that almost nobody notices it until it's already too late. That story began in the forests of Saskatchewan in 2005. A young geology student named Kenton Carnegie was working near a remote mining camp. The area had wolves. That wasn't unusual. At first, they behaved exactly as you would expect. They watched from a distance. They disappeared when people approached. Nothing seemed dangerous. Then, small changes began to appear. Workers noticed wolves lingering longer around camp. They stopped running away as quickly. Some started approaching equipment and work areas. Others became interested in pets and livestock nearby. Each moment seemed insignificant on its own. Together, they formed a pattern that wildlife investigators would later recognize as deeply important. The wolves weren't simply becoming fearless. They were becoming accustomed to people. Scientists call this habituation. It sounds technical. The idea is simple. The more often a wild animal experiences humans without any negative consequences, the more ordinary humans begin to seem. That doesn't automatically make an animal aggressive, but it can remove the natural caution that normally keeps both species safe. Investigators later discovered another piece of the puzzle. A landfill near the mining camp had become an irresistible food source. The wolves had spent weeks running toward garbage disposal areas, tearing open trash bags, and feeding around people without being driven away. Instead of associating humans with danger, they were beginning to associate human activity with opportunity. That seemingly mundane problem changed everything. After Carnegie's death, the mining company installed an electric fence around the landfill specifically to stop wolves from accessing the garbage. It was a practical solution, but it also revealed how something as ordinary as poor waste management may have helped create one of the only confirmed fatal wolf attacks in modern North America. Even more unsettling was what happened just days before the attack. Another camper had reported an unusually bold encounter with wolves. At the time, it seemed like an isolated incident. Later, zoologists looked at that encounter differently. They described it as a probable exploratory attack. The phrase sounds dramatic. Its meaning is surprisingly straightforward. The wolves may not have been trying to kill, they may have been testing. Testing how a human reacted. Testing whether a person could be chased. Testing whether humans were still something to avoid, or something that might become prey. It was less like an ambush and more like a dangerous question. Could this animal be killable? That possibility doesn't mean wolves routinely hunt people. It shows how a gradual chain of events can slowly erase behaviors that usually prevent conflict in the first place. But Carnegie's case also came with an explanation many people found reassuring. The wolves had become heavily habituated to humans. Human behavior had changed theirs. Then another tragedy challenged even that explanation. In 2010, a school teacher named Candace Berner was killed while jogging near the village of Chignik Lake in Alaska. Investigators searched carefully for the familiar causes. They tested for rabies. Nothing. They looked for signs that the wolves had been feeding on human garbage. Nothing. They searched for evidence that the animals were defending a carcass or protecting food. Again, nothing. One of the wolves involved was examined after the attack. It wasn't starving. It wasn't sick. In fact, investigators reported that it appeared to be in good health with unusually large fat reserves. This case refused to fit the comforting narrative that wolves only attack when they're diseased or when humans have fed them. That is exactly why scientists continue to study it. Because reality rarely follows simple rules, healthy wolves almost never attack. Almost never. Those two words matter. One of the most comprehensive reviews ever conducted examined wolf attacks recorded across 4 centuries and across multiple continents. Instead of treating every incident as identical, researchers sorted them by cause. The results painted a far more nuanced picture. 42 people had been attacked after provoking wolves. 3 of those attacks proved fatal. Only about 13% of documented attacks were clearly predatory, meaning the wolf appeared to view the person as prey. That category included 67 victims. 9 were killed. The numbers reveal something important. Provocation and habituation appeared far more often than pure predatory behavior. The stereotype of wolves randomly hunting people simply wasn't supported. Yet another lesson emerged. No single explanation accounts for every case. And perhaps nowhere has that complexity become more visible than in India. While many people in North America and Europe have come to think of wolf attacks as events from distant history, parts of India have experienced a very different reality. Between March and September of 2024, a pack of 6 wolves in Bahraich, Uttar Pradesh, killed at least 10 people and injured more than 30 others. The government launched what became known as Operation Bhadia. Officials first attempted to capture the wolves. As the attacks continued, the response became increasingly urgent. Authorities eventually ordered that the wolves be captured by any means necessary. When capture alone proved insufficient, armed teams were deployed with permission to shoot the animals if required. It was a stark reminder that wildlife conservation and public safety sometimes collide in painfully difficult ways. For people living through those attacks, the debate wasn't theoretical. It was immediate. Even more striking was the historical context. The region had seen something disturbingly similar before. In 1996, a lone wolf was blamed for killing 42 children across 3 districts before 13 wolves were eventually killed during the response. These cases are uncomfortable to discuss. Some people ignore them because they don't fit the image of wolves as misunderstood animals. Others exaggerate them to portray every wolf as a monster. Neither approach tells the whole story. The truth is less satisfying and far more useful. Wolves are neither harmless nor bloodthirsty. They are intelligent predators shaped by environment, opportunity, experience, and instinct. Most of the time, those instincts lead them away from people. Occasionally, under very specific circumstances, they do not. Perhaps the most honest summary came from one of the leading scientists behind the global review of wolf attacks, John Linnell. He explained that most people in North America and Europe can live very close to wolves and be perfectly okay in 99.99999% of cases. Then, he added something equally important. It's never 100%. Things can happen. That single sentence captures the reality better than almost any headline. Fear tells you wolves are always waiting to attack. Romantic myths tell you they never would. Science says neither is true. Your ancestors didn't fear wolves because every encounter ended in tragedy. They feared them because rare dangers leave lasting memories. Your brain still works the same way today. One frightening story can outweigh thousands of ordinary ones. One viral headline can erase decades of quiet coexistence. The wolf hasn't changed nearly as much as the stories surrounding it. And perhaps that's the strangest part of all. The greatest predator in this story isn't always the animal standing in the forest. Sometimes it's the human mind, filling empty spaces with fear long after the evidence has changed. So if you ever find yourself imagining a wolf waiting somewhere beyond the trees, remember the truth is far stranger than the myth. In almost every encounter, the animal is trying just as hard to avoid you as you are trying to avoid it. Almost. And understanding that single word may be the difference between fear and respect. If you enjoyed uncovering the surprising science behind nature's most misunderstood predators, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and join for more fascinating stories from the wild.